Okay, here we are in Tsama Nafshi, Parshas Yisro, on a nice Yom Rishon, and we are trying to start a new Mishnah, on Daf Lamed Aleph, Amid Aleph in Maseches Beitsa, and it's at the bottom of the page. Ein Mevakim Eitzim. Okay, Shabbatai, would you like to start?
Sure. Ein Mevakim Eitzim. We don't chop wood, we don't axe or chop up wood. Lo min ha-korat, and not from the beam, lo min ha-korot she'ne nishbara yom tov. And not from a beam that was shattered or broke on yom tov.
Right.
The aim is not in lo mikat room. We don't chop with an axe. Lo min geira, and I think we said that was a saw. Lo magel, which is a sickle.
Right.
And kufitz, but rather with a cleaver, with a meat cleaver.
Maybe what we might call a machete.
What does Megera mean?
Excuse me?
What does Megera mean?
I think it's a... no, the Megera I think is a saw.
Saw. Magal's a sickle.
Yeah.
So Margaret and I looked up the word for axe in the dictionary, and it's not this word.
Which is the word they use?
I don't know. It's another word, but it's not this word.
Cardum.
We couldn't find this.
Probably cardum.
It wasn't anything close even.
Cardum is what Chazal use for the axe. All right. Well, not always does ancient Hebrew match up with modern Hebrew.
Right.
We're lucky that a lot of the words do match up, and it makes it easier.
Oh, I think it was a kofitz. That name came up in axe, a chopper, chopping.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
Yeah.
So you're saying today it might be more of a word for an axe than it was in their day?
Right.
It's possible. Not only did the modern Hebrew develop through Ben Yehuda, who didn't always understand the real meaning of words. He made it his business, but sometimes he just didn't understand. And also, as any language develops, you can have words shifting in meaning. So it could be even if something meant something in the ancient, and then it became part of the modern, and the modern world maybe doesn't use it the same way. It can happen. Most languages evolve to that extent. Okay, in the meantime, let's just speak out the main principles of the Mishnah as you understand them without having seen Rashi first. What would you say, Shabbatai? What's the main principle here?
That you're not to chop wood at all on Yom Tov.
No, that's certainly not true.
No?
No. And the proof for that is that at the end of the Mishnah, it says it tells you what instrument to use. So if you never do it, why would I tell you to use a certain instrument?
Kofitz.
Yeah. So I know there is an idea of chopping wood. Perhaps you're right. Perhaps we should try to push it off and do it on Erev Yom Tov rather than on Yom Tov if we can. But push comes to shove. Literally, you can do it on Yom Tov. Okay, that's
with this one particular thing, right?
Yeah. So we have a particular implement that we prefer you to use. Okay,
Right.
That's got to be discussed. Why we care what implement you use, but. Aside from that, that's the second issue of the Mishnah. What's the first issue of the Mishnah? It doesn't just say don't chop wood, because then it should say don't chop eitzim. Like in the previous Mishnah, we talked about eitzim as the raw wood.
You can't chop wood from a beam.
That's the point. Yeah. Beams of wood.
What does Mevakim mean?
To chop.
So you have a beam, you can't chop wood from it, and if it's shattered, you can't use the wood from it.
Well, the main thing is a beam of wood has a certain status in halacha. What's the beam of wood? We've talked about this actually once before. It's a kind of muksa. Why? Because it's like expensive lumber.
Ah, okay.
That people who are building a building, they have special beams of wood for constructing the building. They've already been squared off and planed down, and it's ready to use as a proper beam in a building. So those kind of beams of wood, lumber, are expensive items, right? It's like saying, don't take computer paper and just throw it into the fire. Because obviously computer paper costs more than regular paper. And even regular paper, you wouldn't take good paper and just use it for fuel in your fire. You would, especially for writing or especially for computer. So you're not just use it for firewood, right? What do you use for firewood? Cheaper stuff that doesn't cost very much. So therefore, that's the principle of the first half of the Mishnah. That once you have a piece of wood that's been designated for building, it takes on a new status. It's no longer really a proper piece of wood for fire, and therefore it is considered a type of muksa. Not really designated anymore for fire, it's designated for building.
What do you say? Cheshon kiss.
That's right. Muksa machmos chisaron kis. Something that's very expensive, you don't just use it. Like you wouldn't take a mohel wouldn't let you use his mohel knife to butter your toast in the morning, right? He said, no, this is a very expensive item. I don't want you to ruin it. So we have a number of items that are called muksa machmos chisaron kis. We discussed this once before. A few pages ago we had this brought down as one of the subjects of the Mishnah earlier, that we would not be allowed to use it. I think that's what's going on over here as well. What would you say, Sruli?
What?
What's the main message of this Mishnah? In your own personal words.
You're not allowed to chop wood from a knife that's not used for chopping.
Where does it say that?
It's 11
What does that mean?
Not for what does colors mean?
Well, I thought you knew what it meant. You said before you know what it meant. What do you think it means?
I've forgotten this word.
The koira is also related to the word tikra.
Beam, what?
That is correct. What's the word tikra in Hebrew? It's another word for roof.
Also.
For roof. The ceiling. The ceiling is called the
You
tikra.
can't chop wood from a ceiling, right?
Well, again, it's the kind of board that you would use in the ceiling.
Yeah.
Beams of wood. Beams of wood are usually long, slender,
Beams of wood.
strong pieces of wood that have been squared off, and they fit together nicely because you've squared them off and planed them down, and they're ready to be used for a building.
Tikra is with a tet or a tav?
The word tikra,
Yeah.
that would mean roof or ceiling.
Ceiling, yeah.
That would be with a tav. Almost like the word tikva, but instead of tikva, tikra. Okay. So again, truly, how would you characterize the message of
Can't
this
chop
mission?
of wood from beams of wood, right? No, start using beams of wood that are already in usage, right?
First of all, they already have in usage. That's correct. But maybe I could use it still for firewood. Why not? What would you
It's
say?
used for the ceiling.
And therefore, what?
Soisa, right?
Therefore, that's like a very expensive usage, right? That's what it's really made for. But to use it for something like just firewood, which you could use anything, any kind of wood could be used for firewood, seems like a waste. So therefore, people would, generally speaking, want to save the more expensive item. The beams of wood are very expensive items. They'd want to save them for the real usage, building them into your house. and not just use them for firewood. So that becomes a new kind of muksa. What do we call that kind of muksa?
Muksa machsaron kis.
That's right, which means literally what? It's considered muksa machmas on account of chisaron kis. What's chisaron?
Lacking.
Right, it makes you lacking in your kis. What's your kis?
Wallet.
Right. Pocket, right? Out of pocket. Too much pocket money, right? So, since this costs a lot of money, these kind of pieces of timber cost a lot of money, no one's going to want to use them for their firewood. So it becomes a new kind of muksa called muksa machmas chisaron kis. It's muksa due to the fact that it's so expensive, nobody would really want to use it for the cheaper usage anymore. So therefore it becomes a kind of a muksa that's designated for the more expensive usage, and most people would never want to use it for the less expensive usage, which would, for example, be firewood. So that's why we're saying don't chop it up for firewood, because really you're not allowed to lift it at all. If it's really muksa machmas chisaron kis, muksa means you can't even touch it, you can't even lift it, right?
Yes.
It's like the previous Mishnah. What was the lashon of the previous Mishnah? Mevi'in eitzim, ein mevi'in, right? Can you bring it? Can you not bring it? Can you lift it up? Can you not lift it up? The main point is not really chopping per se. If it's muksa, the main point is not really chopping. So if I tell you you're not allowed to chop it, you think, well, I'm allowed to move it. But that's not true, is it? Shabbatai.
Yeah, that's right.
Because it's muksa. If it's muksa, muksa means that you can't even move it. Right? You can't move it even a little bit. Even just to move it from one place to another. Can't.
But why would they? I mean, the first part of the Mishnah says don't do it, right?
Yeah.
And the next part of the Mishnah says, but don't do it with these things.
No, it doesn't say don't do it with these things. It's saying, and the other wood that you're allowed to chop, please make sure the implement that you're using is, again,
So
the appropriate implement.
where does it say the other wood?
Huh?
Where does it say other wood?
Because when it says, don't chop with this, don't chop with that, well, I already know I'm not allowed to chop the other wood at all. So I argue somebody, don't chop with these implements, but you're allowed to chop with another
Oh,
implement.
is that like a diuk?
What?
Is that a diuk?
It's like a diuk. I mean, it doesn't make sense. If you just told me never to chop up this wood,
That's right.
but here you're telling me, okay, don't use these implements, but you could use another implement, it means it's a kind of wood that I can chop. Especially when you remember, like I said before, the real point of the first part of the Mishnah is not chopping per se. What's the real point of the first part of the Mishnah, Sruli?
This part.
The first part of the Mishnah, what's the main message that we just ironed out together, hopefully?
Machsaron kis.
So therefore what? Does it really mean you're not allowed to chop it?
No, only something that's for chopper. It's for expensive. It's for
So can I do other things with it? I can't chop it, but can I do other things with it?
no.
No, nothing. It's muksa. Muksa means I can't do anything with it. I can't lift it up. Can't move it even an inch. Muksa means you can't move it. So this is like one example of what you most want to do with it. You most want to do something like chop wood with, right? Use it for firewood. I'm not saying you can't do, but really the truth is you can't do anything with it. Nothing. Can't even move it. Not even like a little bit over here, over there. So really, if I would write the Mishnah, which I'm sure Baruch Hashem, Rabbi Yudnasi knew better than I, but if I would write it, I would write Ein metaltalim the koros. You can't even move it. Ein magbin, you can't lift it up. Ein mevi'im, like the previous Mishnah talked about mevi'im. Can't move, you can't do anything. Can't move it even 1 inch if it's muksa. Which is really what we're saying. It's muksa. Muksa. Which kind of muksa? Muksa machmas chisaron kis. So maybe there's a reason why Rabbi Yudnasi chose this way of saying it. Instead of saying don't move it, he said don't chop it. But the real pshat is don't move it. Okay?
Yeah.
So,
What's the expression? Muksa?
Machmas.
Machmas?
Chisaron kis. We had it in the Gemora a
Yeah.
few pages ago.
I'm trying to
Want me to
remember.
find it?
Yes.
Here it is. Exactly one page earlier. Mamish.
Yeah, they,
Almost to the line.
they were talking about wood from Lebanon. And,
Yeah, there were different examples there. So, on Daf Lamed, about 8 lines from the bottom, it says, Gemora says, we're talking about Arze de Shucha Vashucha. Arze Vashucha Skinan. De Muksa Machmis Saran Kis. Etc. That's the clear writing of the words. Machmis Machmis Saran Kis right there. Okay, that's the way I'm understanding the Mishnah here. Okay. And so the first half of the Mishnah is really saying you might be tempted to use this wood because it's readily available. Most people have it next to their house in case they need to do any building, right? People in rural neighborhoods always have like extra wood on hand. But the answer is, if it's specially made for building, then it actually becomes muksa for anything else. So then you can't chop with it, you can't do anything, you can't even move it. But the second part of the Mishnah is like saying, but the regular wood that we told you before, Medin Eitzim, for example, previous Mishnah said Medin Eitzim, that there are pieces of wood you're allowed to move, there aren't muksa. Right, we said if it's piled up in a field or if it's in an enclosure, etc. So those kind of pieces of wood that you can use as firewood, you can. So the second half of our Mishnah is saying, okay, the ones you're allowed to chop that aren't muksa machmis saran kis, the regular cheap wood, cheap pieces of wood, they have also a rule. But that means you can chop them, but you have to be careful what you use to chop them up.
Yep.
So I think between the two Mishnayos, if you put the two Mishnayos, the one at the top of the page and one at the bottom of the page together, which, by the way, it's very possible, maybe as homework, you guys could check out a regular Mishnayos, see if they're put together in the regular Mishnayos. It seemed to me to be one theme. How do you use wood on Yom Tov? First part says, well, it depends where the enclosure is, what kind of an enclosure it's in. And we even had that at the beginning of the Mishnah. We talked about muksa, eitzim sheba muksa. Remember that? The first Mishnah of the Parak?
Yeah.
Also deciding where you can bring your wood from. Once we talked about bringing wood, then we have to emphasize also there's certain wood that's out of bounds, that's off limits, that's the kind we use for building, called koros. And then the last little step is, and by the way, when I have the wood that's okay, the regular cheap wood that's good for fire, that's not muksa, what am I allowed to use to chop it up? Are there any limitations on the use? What? Turn off the camera, please.
Right.
Okay. So, is the camera on?
Yes.
So, let's start with the Rashis now on that same Mishnah that we were working on.
Only like an 11 occurs. We cannot chop out wood from a beam.
Exactly.
Fi sugya shel Gemora, he mefareshes. According to the sugya of the Gemora, it can be explained.
What do you think Rashi's saying there?
According to the understanding of earlier the Mishnah is saying, well, the Gemora interprets sugya means the matter, right?
The general discussion of the whole topic.
This can be explained what does the Mishnah mean.
So he's basically saying to you what?
It's going to be explained what does the Mishnah mean.
So why wouldn't he just say nothing? Why would Rashi have to say that? What is he helping me by saying that?
This is we have a question, right? It's a machzor case, right? So
You and I have been explaining it that way, but maybe Rashi doesn't want to tell us that yet. Maybe Rashi wants to leave it a bit mysterious. But if he really just wanted to leave it mysterious, why is he explaining anything? Why not just leave it blank? Just don't say anything, right? Wouldn't that be the most mysterious thing you could say?
Yeah.
Just leave it blank? What do you think, Shabbatai?
I'm trying to work it out.
What are you trying to work out? Do
why
you know
he
what
said-
Rashi's saying?
Yeah, that according to the future explanation of the Gemora would explain this.
Okay.
Coming down.
So sometimes Rashi says, but Gemora mefarish.
Wait, watch this space.
Sorry?
Watch this space. Wait for it.
In other words, cool it.
Yeah, cool. Yeah.
You might have a problem with this. You might not be sure what's going on over here. Rashi says, I don't want to let the cat out of the bag. Because the Gemara is going to do such a good job, I don't need to get involved.
Right.
But often Rashi does explain the Mishnah according to the Gemara. So why would he choose to wait? A. B. Why tell me? If he's just going to wait, just don't leave it blank. Why tell me this? First of all, Rashi doesn't just say his normal spiel. Normally Rashi says, the Gemara mefarish. Even there we have to know why Rashi bothered telling me. But this is a little bit different. Here the words are a little bit more complicated than just the Gemara is going to explain.
Yeah, it's in Sugya.
According to the Sugya of the Gemara, it will be explained.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds like Rashi's saying the Gemara is not going to explain it directly.
Oh.
The Gemara is going to get into a discussion, but according to that discussion, this will be explained as well.
Mm-hmm.
It almost sounds like the Gemara is not going to explain it directly. It's going to be indirectly.
Mm-hmm.
Because if it's direct, Rashi should have just said what he normally says. The Gemara mefarishla. Right? How many Rashis are there like that? Right? We've seen hundreds of Rashis like that. Right?
Yeah.
That's a normal way of Rashi who's decided it's better to leave it for the Gemara to explain than for him to explain for whatever reason. But he's not saying that here. He's saying something a bit more complicated, so it almost sounds like, and after we see the Gemara, perhaps then we can properly estimate why Rashi used this language, but it sounds like he's saying the Gemara is not going to talk about it directly. It's not going to be mefarish law. It's going to be mitpareshes, right? What's the difference between mefarish and mitparesh?
Explain.
Mifaresh would mean
Explain.
it's going to explain, right? That's going to be its task to explain. Mitparesh means
Will be explained.
it will be explained, like it'll come out being explained.
It's passive?
Huh? It's like passive. It's like a bit of like a, yes, exactly. It's a bit more of like a passive form. It's really the hit pa'el form, but it's more like the passive idea of it. Very much like a passive verb in this context, I believe. And also Rashi says another thing. Lefi sugyas Gemora, according to the back and forth of the Gemora, according to the way the Gemora discusses it, it will be explained. Sounds like it's not going to discuss it directly, just according to the way the Gemara goes off onto its own discussion, we will have a good explanation in the end of this Mishnah. Sounds like a very roundabout thing, but okay. In the end, if the Gemara discusses it directly, I'm going to have a bit of a problem with this language. But right now, if the Gemara says it indirectly somehow, I'll feel much better about this usage of the language that Rashi uses. What are you asking?
I was thinking the same thing.
Okay, so
don't
only time will
expect a
tell.
straightforward
Only time will tell, and we'll have to keep our eyes open and then come back. It's always very helpful after you see a Gemara to come back to the Rashi and the Mishnah and try to think, oh, why did he explain it this way in the Mishnah? In any event, okay. So, one thing that we said based on a Gemora earlier that had to do with Muksa Machmus Chisar Kis. Rashi's definitely not saying that. Not that he's saying it's not that. It's not like he's contradicted us, but he also has not gone ahead and just said what I would have thought is just a very simple thing. Because the lumber is so expensive, I didn't think it was like such a big thing for Rashi to push it off till the Gemora and everything. But, okay, again, something more complicated might be going on than meets the eye. Okay, now, all the rest of the Rashis in the Mishnah are for the second part of the Mishnah that I thought was pretty simple, really. Just they're different implements that we can't use, whatever those implements shall be.
The French in there.
But Rashi spends a lot more time on that. Let's see what he says about that. Perhaps because the Gemora doesn't explain it, right? This would explain the first half of the Mishnah, the Gemora explains, so Rashi feels I don't have to explain it. The second half of the Mishnah, the Gemora doesn't really explain, so Rashi feels he has to spend more time on it, perhaps. Okay, Sruli, you're up.
Second half is not explained so well.
It's all a guess. I'm using detective work, they call it, right? My hunch is that if Rashi spent so much more time with the second half of the Mishnah, which I thought was pretty straightforward, then it must be the Gemora doesn't spend much time and Rashi wants to make sure he explains it properly before you leave the Mishnah. There's the other part, Rashi says, I don't have to do much work on this half because the Gemora will discuss it adequately. Okay, let's start with the next Rashi then. So this is the second half of the Mishnah. The Mishnah says what? You're not allowed to chop any wood under the sun, whether it be koros or whatever, even the cheaper wood, with using a kardum. Okay, now I know that's a pretty common word for an axe in their day. You know why? Can you remember another place where this word is used in a Mishnah that's pretty well known? Anybody fairly familiar with Pirkei Avos?
Yeah.
Especially after the 9 o'clock shir that's learning Pirkei Avos now. Hopefully you should become an expert in it. I believe it was Hillel who said, that's my namesake, so very dear to my heart. I believe he said you shouldn't use the Torah as a kardom lachpor ba, as an axe to sort of grind your axe with, right? To chop. Right? You shouldn't use Torah as a means of livelihood. Just I'm only learning Torah because I want to get a good parnasa. That's the way I believe it's Hillel who says you shouldn't use Torah as a kardom lachpor ba, which lachpor can mean to dig as well as to chop apparently. Okay, so Rashi says, Sruli, you're up.
What about collecting for Torah?
Collecting for Torah is your main kavanah should always be to help Torah. And then if you it says Hillel, you know how Hillel he had to pay to get into the Beis Midrash in his day. He had to pay the shomer, he had to pay. So you know what he used to do? He used to actually chop wood. Ironically, here we are talking about chopping wood, and that was Hillel's profession. One day he said he didn't find enough wood, wasn't able to sell it properly, and didn't have enough money to pay the shomers. You know what he did? He went up to the roof. Problem was, it was around this time of year, and it snowed. And it was on Erev Shabbos. So I guess his wife wondered where he was when he didn't come home Leil Shabbos, but they finally realized where he was Shabbos morning. Because they looked up and they saw in the skylight, that's how they got their light through a hole in the roof that was called a skylight. They saw a shadow that looked like a human body. They realized there's someone up there. Okay, says Rashi about the kardom.
Some kardom asur kmin kli umas. A regular kardom is made like a professional crafts.
Okay, now what's interesting about Rashi, I believe, is that even Rashi can feed you a lot of information. Almost always, in the first few words, Rashi will try to give you the most critical information. Sruli?
Yeah.
So do you know what I'm implying?
You
know what I'm implying? You want to know what I'm implying?
What?
Yes?
Yeah.
that the first few words in Rashi are the most critical words. You know what that means?
Important.
That's right. So what is Rashi saying? Let's just think about what he's saying. You know why the Chazal don't want you to use a kardum? Because a stam, kardum, is what? Made like a type of kli umnus. It doesn't say quite that it is a kli umnus. That doesn't always matter to Rashi what it is, right? Sometimes in Chazal, they're worried about what?
Its appearance.
The way it looks,
Yeah.
right? How things look to other people. So Rashi, I think, is using every little device at his disposal to hone us in on the problem. Remember, we didn't know. What's the problem with these implements? Why are Chazal against these implements? And why are they okay with chofetz?
Yeah.
So right away Rashi focuses us on a very important point. What is that, Sruli? That he says something that looks like a type of kli umnus. Okay. That osin bo. What's osin bo?
He makes.
Generally, people make with it. This kli umnus that he's talking about. People make with it.
People make with it
Uchvos, sargos. Right? Different kinds of, I guess, leather implements. I think uchvos are saddles and sargos are maybe belts. I don't know. The word soreg, it means weaving. But anyhow, okay. Shikorim.
Shikorim isish.
Aishish, or Aishis. Whatever. If we knew French, we'd be better, a lot better. Okay.
Where's Jack when you need him?
Yeah. Now you have a reason to call him up tonight and say, by the way, Jack, we really need you here. We've got some important French words in the Rashi.
This looks like hashish. I mean, it's key hashish. It's not really hashish.
Alright, well that's a good way to remember the word the Rashi's using, but that's not what he's talking about, obviously. And look, Rashi says it again. V'yesh. You see, again, Rashi repeated the same phrase.
Why is he doing that?
You know why? Because he's describing two different kinds of kli, right? He said it's a little bit like this one, it's a little bit like that one, but the main thing in Rashi is what? It's like a kli umas, right? That's what's really, Rashi's putting his finger on it twice. If you didn't catch it the first time, Rashi says, okay, I'll repeat it again. This is what Chazal are not happy with. Using a kli that looks like a professional kli. What could be wrong with using a professional kli? Like a weekday act, correct. And it might even look like you're doing something wrong on Yom Tov, right? Maybe it looks like you're using it to do a craft, right? You have, in the back room, you're doing some kind of craft.
You guys use different words,
Huh?
The first is kamin, and the second is ka'an. Ka'in.
That's the same idea.
Yeah.
You're right. It's a bit different. But ka'ain ain't. Me'ain olam haba. Shabbos is me'ain olam haba. It means it resembles olam haba. In a very small way, it resembles. So maybe kamin is closer. It looks like a type of this, and ka'ain means it resembles. That's not even as close. It just resembles. Like Shabbos resembles olam haba. You think in olam haba we're going to eat and sleep? And eat cholent in olam haba?
No.
No, there's something about Shabbos altogether that resembles olam haba. Right? That you work the whole week and then you relax and you enjoy. That's a little bit like olam haba. There's a few elements of olam haba that you find in Shabbos. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. So again, Rashi has put his finger a little bit more on the problem the Chazal obviously don't like about these implements. So that even if I don't know what these implements are, I would say in a certain sense, who cares, right? Obviously it matters, but the principle is what's more important here. Because first of all, who says today, the implements of today are the same as in their day? But if I know the principle, Chazal do not want me to use an implement that resembles in a certain way what the craftsmen use, and then I'm halfway towards understanding the halacha for our day and age. That would help me out today as well. Whereas if I know the particular implement he's talking about, it may not actually help me. Because they used it in their day, because they use it in our day. Anyhow, but it's okay. But Rashi still wants me to know what these things are. That what? Shikorin. Another word for Jack.
Shikorin
Birgua. Okay, that was very helpful. And by the way, a lot of the Gemoras have in the back a dictionary where you can see the Hebrew equivalent and the Yiddish, for those who know Yiddish.
Where do they have Yiddish in the Gemora?
No, I'm saying there's somebody who wrote like a parish in the back that took these French words of Rashi and translate them into Hebrew and sometimes Yiddish. And there are obviously today books that have been printed for the English-speaking crowd, which will translate these words into the English equivalent. But I'm saying even if you just want to use what you have in your own Gemora, you can sometimes flip back. It's called the Matargim, the Targum, the Matargim.
It's in the back of it?
Yeah, most regular Gemoras have it in the back. It's usually between the Maharsha, right after the Maharsha. Like if you know where the Maharsha is right after the Rosh. The Rosh is usually the first thing after the Gemora. So you usually have the Rosh, the Maharsha, and then this Targum. But sometimes they put it earlier between the Rosh and the Maharsha. Somewhere in there, before or after the Maharsha, is usually this Matargim. And then it usually goes by page, and then you have to find on that what looks like the Rashi word that he used, and then see if there's any equivalencies. This Gemara that I have is not going to produce it, but it just doesn't have it. Okay, are we good?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Shmosher Hector. Its tip, its hair is very short.
So what is it?
Rosh HaKatzar. What's Rosh HaKatzar? So really you have to pull yourself together for 10 minutes.
Yep, but just tomorrow it's 15 minutes sleep.
Great. Today, pull yourself together. Rosh HaKatzar. What does that mean? Rosh HaKatzar.
Tip is cut off.
No, the short end. The short end.
HaKatzar means short.
The short end. There's two ends of this implement. I kind of think of it like one of those axes that has a sharp edge on either side. Right? Like it has, here's the stick, and then here's the blade. And some axes only have a sharp edge on one side, but some have on the other side. That's what Rashi's saying, I think. There's two sides of an axe, the shorter and the wider side. Here, even the shorter side, the more narrow side, is Dome, the Karduma Shalom. It looks a little bit like our axes.
Our axes.
The Rosh Hasheni, and the wider side, is Dome Lekli, Umni, Uchvos Vasargos, right? More like the Kli that these craftsmen use for their saddles and whatever. Hasusi, right? Things that are used for the horses. Okay, but again, I think the point is well taken in Rashi that something about these implements are too professional looking.
Yes.
Therefore, if you start wielding this axe, someone's going to look over and say, "Look, he's using one of those professional things. He must be doing a bit of craft on the side, right? Maybe he's in the back room. He's doing a bit more of the crafts. That's a Marzayim. That could be part of what Chazal are worried about, or maybe, like we said before, just the fact that it looks like something that's used during Chol. In any event, the Lo Megeira, Shiga, right? That's another French word for saw, supposedly. Malaya Pegimos. It's like a knife, which is what? Full of a pagima. You know what a pagima is? Indents. What we call a serrated edge. Pagum means like lacking, kind of. So like you have a part of the blade that's out, and then you have a part that goes in. The part that's out, part that's in. That's called a serrated edge in English. So Rashi says that would characterize, basically that's what a saw is, right? When you saw wood, have you ever sawed wood? That's what a saw is. A proper saw is serrated. Right? It has like teeth.
Yes.
That's what Rashi says. That's a Megera. And therefore, since it's serrated, memaher, lakutz, bo eitzim. To cut wood. They're very good at cutting wood, right? Very good, because they're serrated, so you just move it back and forth a few times, it already chops it off. And again, Rashi puts his finger on it a third time. What's wrong with this? No, here he doesn't even say kid. It just says kli umanu. This already, a real saw, a nice proper saw, is something that real carpenters use. Right? A carpenter uses it. It's kli uman of the carpenter, right? What carpenter doesn't have a proper saw?
And you could say,
Today they have electric saws, but in those days they had a manual.
and you could say, I saw him doing this. He's crafty.
That's right. Only if they live down under.
If they what?
Live down under. Now, we're almost through the Rashis. Hopefully we'll be able to make it. Magel. What's a magel that you're also not allowed to use? Another French word we're going to ask Jack.
Or sarfa.
Or sharfa. Good. Nice French words, right? Baruch Hashem. You ever go to France, you'll know what to say. Go to the store and you ask for a sharfa, see what they give you. Okay? Oh my gosh. This is now, how many times has Rashi said it? 4 times. This 4th time that he's put his finger on the problem, right? If you haven't caught it the first time, hopefully you caught it the 2nd time. Didn't catch it the first 2 times, hopefully you caught it the 3rd time. Didn't catch it the 3rd time, Rashi makes sure to tell you a 4th time. You know what the problem is? Here we go. Now Rashi gets down to the nitty gritty. Who cares if it's a kli uman? Because it looks like what?
Doing a malacha.
You're doing a malacha, right? You're in the back room doing some kind of bad thing. So Rashi here is saying more than what we thought before, more than just that it's chol or something like that. It really looks like you're doing a malacha. That's what we call classically Maris Ayin, right? That's the guy we don't like to invite over to a party, Maris Ayin. Yeah, there you go. See, Rashi waited till the 4th time to tell you the real vort. It's interesting. 3 times he sort of hinted at it. Maybe it's like a pedantic kind of exercise. Rashi says, I'll tell you 3 times, see if you can figure it out. And the 4th time, I'll tell you the real pshat. Right? So he gave us 3 times to figure it out on our own. And if not, this 4th time he told us exactly what the problem is. Thank you, Rashi. So now the question is, if that's what the problem with the first few implements, then why is it okay with the kofitz? So Rashi says, Ela b'kofitz, rather you can only use a kofitz. Why? A normal kofitz is the kind of knife that a butcher uses, right? A cleaver or a machete, right? That they use to chop the meat. And now what? It's a little bit like ours. Now if you remember before, Rashi says when you have an axe with 2 sides, it's more like the smaller side. That's more like our axe. Here he's saying that this knife, this chopping thing is also a little bit like our axe. That what? And here he goes and he says the main thing. Butchers use it. He said, he just finished saying butchers use it. What do I hear from that? If butchers use it, it's still not called a kli uman. What can you conclude from that? Is a butcher an uman?
No.
Doesn't sound like it. Because he just told me, butchers use this, but it's not a kli uman. That means, obviously, a butcher is not an uman. So an uman must be someone who's like a carpenter or some kind of craftsman who actually does malacha. Whereas a butcher doesn't really do malacha, except he does obviously kill the animal at some point, but other than that, just chopping off meat is not a malacha.
They make things, he destroys.
Good. So Rashi has been very thorough, right? Those who keep their ear low to the ground and hear from Rashi, he's already said 4 times what's the problem with these other kalim. And now when he talks about the kofitz, what's good about it, he mamash puts his finger again, right on it. There's no subtlety in this Rashi. Baruch Hashem. Shnei roshim. Some people also make 2 sides to this cleaver, that it doesn't just cut on one side, it cuts on both sides. Like a sword, really. A sword is sharp on both sides, right? The kardom, ha'uchvus. Right now, he said before, if it's like the kardom ha'uchvus, he said it's no good. Here he's saying, if you have 2 sides, it does start to look like the kardom ha'uchvus. So what happens then? What do you think is going to happen then? If it starts to look a little bit more like the kardom ha'uchvus, which Rashi said originally that was the problem with kardom. So what's going to happen here if the butcher's cleaver has on both sides and it starts to look a little bit like the regular kardom of their uchvus? Kiddush ma'inan minei beGemora. See, Rashi now says the Gemora is going to talk about this, right? Because now it's a question. If it's a kofitz, but it starts to look a little bit like the kardum of the uchvus, which Rashi said before is a problem because it's a kli uman. So what do you think is going to happen to the kofitz when it starts to look that way?
It's going to be usr.
Might be usr, right? Then Rashi says, as will be understood in the Gemora. Right? Now Rashi again is alluding to the Gemora because it's going to be a question in the Gemora. Thank you, Rashi. But that's talking about the special one that had on both sides a sharp edge. But Mihu, however,
Mihu Tsama of Malachas Omer.
Stamei, the normal one, the normal kofitz. However, the normal one that only has one blade is not for an uman, it's only for a butcher. But it has a sharp on 2 sides and starts to be a problem. Then the Gemara will discuss it. Okay, stop here. Shkoyach.